Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm really excited this time to be talking to Kevin Gibbons, who, well, we go back quite a long way and actually started out knowing each other as competitors, right? In the days when I was running Distilled, and Kevin's agency, Resignal, has been one of those kind of great agencies that we came up against in pitches over the years. Thankfully, we don't compete anymore, so we can have this kind of we've always had friendly chats, but we can collaborate on things as well. And what has brought us together this time is that Resignal has really focused in on e-commerce, and definitely one of the recommendations we'd make if folks are looking for an agency to work with on their e-commerce SEO. And in fact, they describe themselves as e-commerce SEO. And I thought maybe that's where we'd start, because obviously that's very closely aligned kind of target market wise and in all of the work we do with the work we do at SearchPilot. So I never managed to kind of convince myself to specialize that much in the Distilled era. I always felt like I should have, and a lot of people, it's a lot of advice that's out there, but it's a scary thing to focus in and say, this is the niche, this is the vertical or the area that we're really going to focus in on. So I thought we'd start the conversation there, Kevin. How was that for you? Was it a scary thing? Did you find it daunting to kind of say, this is who we're for?
Absolutely, yeah. No, appreciate the intro as well. But in terms of almost going back to the start a little bit, I was very much, let's do everything that we can, SEO wise, and even paid search back then, in terms of clients that we serve and how do we grow. And it almost sounds more natural to say, you start with a sector and then you grow outwards. So you go from e-commerce to financial services to travel to B2B, etc., etc. And I think the reality is, once you realise what type of agency you want to build, for us, we've been very clear, probably for the last 10 years now, that we want to be an agency that works with medium through to enterprise level clients. And for us, our sweet spot is normally working with 12 to 15 clients at any point in time. We don't want to be an agency that works with 30, 50 clients. We've done that in the past, but for us, it's very much about actually how do we have a core group of clients that we can position ourselves around. We know we can do great work for them. We're selective about who we take on. And what we found over time is that's not many clients. It makes more sense to actually say, okay, well, how do we pinpoint where do we do our best work? And there's been a whole evolution behind this in terms of where we've come from and how we've got to e-commerce. But I think part of it was shaping, okay, well, as we grow, we do still want to stay true to that core group that we're working with, and then those clients get bigger over time. So from that basis, in order to work with, let's say, 15 clients max, you really need an ICP that's still quite tight, quite niche, and it makes more sense. It certainly, when you look at sales and marketing activity, you can be more pointed around what you're doing. You can speak at conferences like retail events. You can enter awards around e-commerce events. You can do all of that sort of stuff, that rather than feeling like you're trying to be everywhere, you're actually just more focused on that core message. The other thing I would add is, I think we've gone through that journey of we serve everyone for search into, then it's kind of more SEO, then it's been B2C, so kind of travel, financial services, retail, I would say probably 8 to 10 years ago, probably in that order. I think we then had a realization of, we did some stuff like online gambling and stuff like that in the past that we just realized didn't actually sit well with us. We decided we wanted to move away from that and focus certainly on the B2C, those three key sectors that I mentioned. And I would say the tipping point really came during COVID, because in the past we'd done a lot of work in travel. Expedia was a big client of ours, Audley Travel, kind of a number of brands that we worked with across the year. I could probably know about 50 brands within travel. That fell away, and for obvious reasons. Financial services for us was probably the third sector at that point in time. We did continue to work with a couple of brands of financial services at that point in time, but we realised our track record at that point was our best case studies were ASICS, Fat Face, if you go back a bit further, Bloom and Wild, Pottery Barn, kind of a number of brands that we'd done good work with within e-commerce. And then, like I say, kind of it got to a point of, okay, well, we want to double down on our sales and marketing. Who do we really want to win next as a client? How do we focus our effort around that kind of track record that we've got backwards facing and turn that into what do we want to win as the next client? And I always like that saying, you shape your agency one client at a time. So for us, it's thinking about who do we want to get next? Where do we want to be in 2, 3, 5 years' time? And then, kind of build a plan around how to get there.
Yeah. I like the way that it brings together the kind of operational stuff, like you say, what are we best at? Where are we doing our best work? With the clarity of what you take to the market, how you describe yourself, all the sales and marketing collateral, all those kind of events that you go to. Obviously, you run an event as well, which we're going to be at, and that kind of lines up. All of those things line up neatly, don't they? But it is still a scary thing, and I think what we obviously went through the same journey on the travel side through COVID.
Yeah.
And I think there's also something for us as we've thought about the e-commerce space. There's something that I find myself drawn to it from I'm very interested in it. I think it's one of those areas that I think it's there's a lot of really interesting challenges, whether it's the merchant feed side of things on the technical side, whether it's the way that the SERP itself is changing, the interaction with obviously the new technologies around AI and so forth. So for me, it's all of those things kind of coming together. How was it internally for you? How did the team respond? Were they like, oh my God, he's gone mad, he's saying that we can't work with 90% of the people that we used to work with, or was it kind of energizing?
It was energizing in the sense of it gave us focus, and it meant that we could go deeper in terms of our expertise. And I think that helped because then, certainly, like I say, sales and marketing, it's an obvious step. We used to run a breakfast event every month, which for us was every month, but for the attendees, it would be every quarter. And we ran that around financial services, traveling and e-commerce. And it got to a point, it was quite a juggling act of, we're always doing stuff. And then we're kind of quite guilty as a marketing agency ourselves of doing stuff, but not quite following it through. So it's sort of like, okay, well, we've just done that one thing. Now let's do the next thing. Now let's do the next thing, without actually converting it into a sale. Whereas actually it makes much more sense to say, okay, well, let's just double down on e-com, and then we don't have to be chasing our tail all the time doing lots of stuff. We can be more focused about it, really build an audience and a community, and then look at kind of how we can then turn that from a top of funnel and move it through the funnel in terms of client acquisition. And like I said before, I think we probably had a very large top of funnel, but not as much dropping through. And I think this is the thing that, in terms of that scary step, I think the big thing to look at is your win rate. So if you're really being selective and focused around, these are the clients that we work best with, then I think you'll find that actually that effort, you can probably do more with less in terms of the time and the focus. So I think that was really important. And like I say, then it's for the team. I found, and we can go on to this in terms of like just how to get the best out of teams and kind of make teams high performing. But for me, if I was to pick the biggest thing in terms of how to attract talent, is they want to work on great accounts. So for us, if you've got someone that is working on brands, people really want to get kind of under the skin of, they want to understand them, and they want to kind of feel like they're adding a difference. And it's something that is great to put on someone's CV and track record, and it's just interesting as a challenge that people thrive on solving big problems for exciting brands. And I think people were energized by that, because it wasn't, how do we do SEO for your local construction company. No offense to them, but
well, we've all been there.
We've all been there.
in
We've
places.
done it. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. So I think it's stuff like that, I think, energizes the team. The other thing we have said is it's kind of, when we took that step, it was kind of more of an 80-20 rule. It was 80% of our client base was e-commerce at that point in time. And we felt that was a big enough percentage to say, okay, well, let's make our positioning more about what we want in the future. Doesn't have to be 100% exclusive. We've got clients that, there's a couple I can think of that were clients at previous brands that have moved companies and they've wanted to take us with them. In both cases I can think of there, we haven't had a pitch. They like to work with us. They want to come back. They want to work with us again. It's not 100% fit for e-commerce, but they know us. We know them. And it's something that we think would be a good fit. So I think there's a difference between your target and the market. So your target could be very much, these are e-commerce brands and you might have the 100 dream clients or whatever number you want to pick in terms of being focused around where you really want to go. And the market could be an outer ring, if you like, in terms of the circle of, okay, well, you will attract interest from other companies along that journey, and then it's up to you to qualify them in or out if you think it's a good fit for you, and it's something that you can do a good job on.
Yeah. That actually was something that helped me tip over, because we've really gone on this journey of what do we call these things? What's the language we use? The difference between the ideal customer profile and the target market and the addressable market, and all of that kind of stuff. And it's really the last 6 months that we've got very specific of saying that our ideal customers are really the enterprise retailers, even specifically in UK, US, Canada, and they're doing 100 million plus online in those territories. They don't have to be headquartered in those territories. We work with some folks who are headquartered globally, but we need them to be operating in those places for the ideal customer profile. And the thing that helped me was, actually, there's an article by, I forget the guy's actual name, but he blogs as a smart bear. I think he's the founder of WP Engine. So there's all kinds of WordPress controversy going on, but we'll ignore that for the purposes of this. But he blogs and has done for years. And he wrote a thing that I found very helpful on exactly what you were just talking about, the kind of concentric circles idea of having, you maybe even have your named list, who are the 25 people that we would most like to work with in the world, the ideal customer profile, which is more like the characteristics like I was talking about, the target market, which is essentially anybody you'd allow into your sales funnel, and the addressable market, which is, well, we could expand that target market over time, as if we want to, if we need to. And the thing that helped me in his thinking and his writing was he described a whole load of case studies across lots of industries of the more you narrow the ICP, the more you actually win in the target market. But you don't win everyone in the target market. You win the bits of the target market that either look like the ICP or look up to the ICP or learn from the ICP or have the same problems as the ICP. And the fact that you've narrowed it really that specifically and that tightly means you're speaking so much more concretely. And this is something that I definitely struggle with. I can lapse into thinking in big frameworks and kind of talking in academic language and whatever. And I really need to be like, no, like, who are we talking about and what are we talking about doing for them? And that's kind of, I found that almost safety net of saying, don't worry, you'll actually be attractive outside.
I think that's right, because you're talking their language, and equally, if you're going deeper, you can show your expertise. Whereas if you're talking as a generalist, it's quite hard to then kind of like, you see it in SEO. There's people who now specialize in news SEO, e-commerce SEO, financial services SEO, in a way that we wouldn't have seen back when we were talking about when we both started out running agencies. You wouldn't have that at all. But equally now,
it starts to pervade, doesn't it? Yeah, because you naturally start using the language like in e-commerce. We'll be talking about PLPs and PDPs and I don't know, basket size and all of the languages, the language and the models and the metrics that they care about. And so that's probably kind of starts leading us into some of the interesting trends that are going on. Some of the things, so I've been talking a lot about the Google becoming the PLP, right? So we see in the US leading the way more so than the UK, but my assumption is that it's coming here as well. is this idea of being much more prominent with the product pages. So what used to be the shopping tab kind of coming into the main search results, you see the I think it's called popular product grid, and so forth. I assume you're kind of seeing a lot of those kind of same kind of things. You've also talked quite a lot. You did a great report that we should link to. We put out on the socials of obviously you've mentioned a bunch of great sports brands. We work in the sports industry as well, and you had that great report on growth where you were talking about trends in the specifically in sports and athleisure. I don't know how you even say that word.
I think you said that right.
And the growth of brands going D2C, which it feels like there's kind of market trends and Google trends and all this kind of stuff. Like how are you? What are you hearing from the folks you're working with about how they're thinking about all of these trends together?
I think it is very similar to what you're saying of like certainly the merchant center. The fact that I think you're right that there's quite a lot that's getting rolled out in the US that feels ahead of the UK and Europe right now. And it's starting to shift, but probably a higher percentage in the US versus what we're seeing. And that feels like a trend of what's more to come in terms of the UK and Europe. And yeah, I think for us, some of it is, in some cases, it's a bit of a back to basics in terms of what's actually working for our clients. So looking at product pages are certainly ranking quite highly in Google, not to mention obviously Merchant Center and shopping feeds and everything else kind of alongside that. So product page optimization feels more important than ever. And I think it's just trying to understand those trends and where we should focus our effort in terms of, kind of what's working. But it does feel like it's, kind of doubling down in terms of how do we make, if that's what Google wants to rank, how do we make that as strong as possible? And looking at things like, again, like including subject matter experts, making that content as strong as possible in a way that is more difficult to replicate. And I know we've probably been talking about these types of things for years, but at the same time, there's a shift in actually like how effective that is versus what you should be doing. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Actually, there's something interesting. So there was a stat that I pulled out of that report that you wrote. You talked about, I think the stat was 77% of non-brand traffic this is in sports and athleisure, 77% of non-brand traffic is currently going to sports retailers and department stores. And the implication being there's this huge growth opportunity for the D2C side of things, where of the brands themselves coming into that space. And you've mentioned a few. As I say, we work with global sports brands, and I think that's something that I mentioned before. One of the things I like about e-commerce is it's exciting and dynamic, and like from a business perspective, it's really interesting. And I think that those strategies they have, where they're taking their brands direct to the market, again, everything old is new again. Was it 2008? I think the Vince update was the brand era update in Google. When I remember that I think it was at that time that we had the then CEO Eric Schmidt saying brands are how you sort out the cesspool of the internet. I never got that quote right. It was something like that, wasn't it? The first time round when they demolished lots of small websites, and I think I suspect, and what I'm hearing from our customers is we're seeing that very much across the AI play, right? That the AIs are much, much more likely to recommend brands, because that's how a language model kind of works, right? That's almost what a brand is, in a certain sense.
I think that's right. I think Google have probably doubled down on that since as well, from an organic perspective as well. So I think that's true. I think the other thing, just from and this is where it's interesting on the business side, but a lot of these brands have dilemmas around, do they actually list their products themselves on Amazon? Because if you think about search demand, obviously there's a lot of search demand on Amazon itself. There's dilemmas around sports retailers. Look at an example like running shoes. Quite often every year you'll have a new brand, and it might be the Asics Gelcano. I'm not sure what number they're up to on the top of my head, 15, so let's say. But you can buy the 14 cheaper on Amazon and JD Sports, Sports Direct, etc. And now it's okay, well, do we kind of use those merchandisers, if you like, in terms of being able to be listed on there, because otherwise you're not going to capture a sale? Or equally, do you have an outlet that allows people to buy those kind of older products at a discount? And again, how do you look at that from a profitability perspective versus your new products and everything else? And it's not an easy answer. And certainly in terms of, if you're looking at this purely for an SEO lens, you want to capture the traffic, you might say, let's not be listed anywhere else. If you're looking at it through a customer lens, people are searching on different platforms. So again, it's tricky to get, there's not a clear yes or no answer. You need analysis to tell you. Okay,
and different brands are going to choose different things, aren't they? And you see that, I think, really interestingly with what you're talking about the generations of products. When you're talking about, are they branded the same thing and they update the number? Are they called the exact same thing? Is it different colorways? Or, you see that a lot in, like you say, in where you've got athlete endorsements and so forth.
Yeah.
What do they wear in the playoffs? Those kind of hooks. Obviously on the more leisure side, the influencers who are not necessarily the sponsored athletes, and all of that ties into. I mean, yeah, especially in some of those cases, you've got actually sometimes the back catalogue or the rare things are even more in demand than the current thing. So you could probably map out some kind of grid, couldn't you, of the folks who are taking all of the different strategies of, we want our back catalogue to be exclusive and hard to find. We want it to be widely available and bought from us. We want it to be findable if you really go looking for it, if you're the kind of bargain hunter, but actually we're steering you towards this year's greatest model. There's lots of different interesting strategies in there.
Yeah, and it's just picking that battle and understanding actually which one do you want to win. And it's not, sometimes it's mass market, sometimes it's kind of more specialist. And it's, kind of, like I say, some people are focused on volume of sales and revenue. Some people are focused on profitability. And
it's actually quite analogous to what we were talking about in terms of our ICP, of them thinking about, is your ICP as a brand, is it the elite athletes? Is it the fun runners? Is it the actually you want people to be wearing this on the high street?
Exactly.
And again, being clear about who you are and what you're for is very interesting. Let's take it into the business realm for a second, starting with the clients and customers business. So I realized actually, as you were talking earlier, that one of the other benefits we've seen of the ICP focus is getting deeper, finding it easier to get deeper into knowing more people at our customers' businesses. If I think back to the days of running SearchLove, I know from that era, and from the 20 years now, I know SEO people in every business imaginable, every client business, every agency, every independent consultant, and it's only recently that I've got some of those vertical slices where I know finance people, and I know executives and leadership, and I know product people, and I know engineering people, kind of in the one organization. And I think one that's been really interesting to me recently is the finance folks. So getting the chance to get deeper into how they think, how they model, how they hold different bits of the business accountable, what they care about. And this is another one of kind of speaking their language. And one of the things that's been really fascinating to me in this process is finally finding the people in the business who look at paid search and organic search together, or at least through the same lens. And if you think back to our kind of more naive SEO era in the let's say that was decades ago, and we've all stood on stage and railed about the fact that PPC budgets are so big, and surely somebody somewhere in the business cares about this stuff. And I think we'd all always thought it's about going up the kind of marketing chain, but it's always been surprising how high up the marketing chain you have to go before you find somebody who's accountable for both bits. And so actually it turns out finance is some of the key to this. There are, the financial controller side of things are looking at those budgets, comparing them, thinking about cost per acquisition, thinking about how they how they sit together. And I've heard some funny quotes. One major retailer finance person told me that the paid search overspend in a single month was bigger than the entire annual SEO budget.
I've certainly heard stories like that.
Which, but it's finally finding the people who care about that stuff. Like, finance cares about that stuff. And so they're starting to ask, well, what if we just gave a few % of this budget over there? Or the other one that I've been hearing a lot about is the worries about cost inflation on the PPC side. So the cost per click, cost per lead, cost per acquisition going up faster than inflation. And saying, it's a little bit like looking at an aging population. You kind of say, you extrapolate that out a few years and you say, my kind of 2028 marketing plan looks really tough if this inflation curve continues. I know you've done a lot on this, bringing these things together. So is that resonating with your experience? And
I'm almost trying to think where to start because there's all sorts of ideas that come together there. But there's one example I've had probably 5 or 6 years ago. Our largest client at the time came to us and they were kind of like, we're happy with the service. We want to renew the contract, but our budgets are being squeezed and we want to renew, but we can't renew at the same level of budget. We need to reduce by, it was something like at least 20% haircut in terms of what we were doing previously. And
classic bad day email in agency life.
I took that to heart of like, you're mad, like this is working incredibly well. And I literally just spent probably the best part of the day going through and I created an analysis of what's your ROI of paid search versus SEO. And I went back and I found that for every £1 they spent on Google Ads, they made £4 back. And for every £1 they spent with us on SEO, they made, it was something like £9 back. And that wasn't to take into account that paid search is a tap that can be turned on and off, and SEO, hopefully, I mean, I'm sure you'd get a drop off over time if you did nothing, but it's obviously more sustainable. We ended up, rather than them reducing 20% of the budget, they increased our budget by 50% because it was like,
nice.
Oh, wow. But to your point, you need the finance person to look at that. If you've just got the SEO budget holder, they've just been handed a budget. Whereas actually this is, no, you're right. We should be taking our bottom 10% of spend in paid search and again, I never particularly like the SEO versus paid search budget fight. I think both of them should work for you and they should be profitable and making a return. And in that case, if you've got the means to do so, invest in both and grow as much as you can in both. But I think it is interesting how you have to look at that from that finance view. Like we've done quite a bit of work with private equity and looking at, say, due diligence around acquisitions and things that personally I find very interesting, but they're also very sharp in terms of the questions that they ask you, like the type of questions that you don't always get day to day with a client, and they're the things that I almost like smack my head against the wall of like, why didn't I think of that? But they're asking the right things, and quite often it, again, like top level, it's what are the risks involved in terms of moving forward. We've looked at some business models that have since been destroyed by AI, and they would have seen that coming 4 or 5 years ago, which I think is actually very insightful in terms of just the way that they look, and they didn't make an investment due to the fact of what could have happened and has now materialised. But equally, what's the opportunity? What's the upside? If you're looking at this through a lens of we want to maximise our return over the next 3 to 4 years, and then obviously from their perspective, they'd probably then flip that investment onto the next one. What can you do in that time? And having a look at, okay, if you were to invest X amount of hundreds of thousands of dollars, what does that mean in terms of the upside that will bring and the valuation and obviously everything else from their perspective? And it's looking at that purely from a investment growth perspective.
Money in, money out.
Yeah, exactly. But I think it really helps you to sharpen up, okay, well, what is it that you're doing and what's that return? And if you were in their shoes, why would you write that check in terms of the investment here versus something else?
Yeah. There's something, I agree with you. Some of the kind of financial analysis that you get from those folks can be some of the smartest, and it's kind of annoying, but in a good way.
Annoyingly smart,
questions. And actually, the one thing that I noticed, so Distilled sold to Brain Labs, which was private equity backed, and has subsequently gone through that next round of
course,
the original private equity backers selling to the next set of private equity backers. And one of the things that I found really interesting in looking at that process was it was about that 3 to 4 year horizon, right? Because that's the fund, that's that's the plan, like you say. But it's always looking at least one of those ahead. So it's about saying, I remember we started conversations in 2019 to sell in early 2020, and they'd raised in early 2019, and Dan Gilbert, the Brain Labs founder, his pitch to the Living Bridge private equity folks in 2019 was essentially mapping what the pitch was going to look like in 2023 or 2024 when they came to the next private equity pitch. It was essentially saying, look here in 2019, this is the pitch we're going to be able to put together in 2023 if we do all these things. And so it's about the short-term result, but it's about the short-term result towards a story. And I think that the folks who do that well, Dan has definitely done this well, tell that story in a way that builds the framework of how you achieve it as well. It kind of actually breaks it down into like, this is what we're going to do, and the output almost is the story, the next chapter.
Yeah, that makes sense. And obviously, from that perspective, you need to leave something on the table in order to.
There's always got to be the next guy has to believe that there's growth from there, and so it can't be about that kind of. It can't just be we're cynically flipping this thing. It's like we have to be building something where the next team believes that they've got the journey, the next phase of the journey ahead of them.
I think that's where sometimes, to link this into marketing terms, there can be a frustration as well. I wrote an article probably about 10 years ago now about how short-termism is killing marketing, because you just get everyone that looks at what's your results for the last quarter rather than actually what's the sustainable route for the next 3 to 5 years. And you can't say SEO is a perfect example. You can't just say SEO is a leap of faith and in 5 years' time this will be worth it. Until then, don't ask us any questions. Like, it doesn't work like that.
It doesn't work like that.
It'd be nice if it did, but it doesn't work like that. But equally, if you're just judging the short-term results of SEO, it also doesn't work like that. So it's kind of...
Or like I say, if you're ignoring the fact that your paid search clicks might be 15% more expensive next year than they were this year. Yeah. You need the blend, don't you, of the short-term metrics and the at least medium-term vision.
I think that inflation's a really good point, actually, in terms of factoring that in. I remember years, I think Richard Fergie, he used to be in my team, belongs like basically A-star Oxford Maths student who I basically gave our paid search department to probably within about a week, because it's like, you're just so much smarter than me and just get on with it. You know what you're doing.
Paid search is that kind of thing, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And I remember on a whiteboard in our old office in Oxford, and again, this is going back like 15 years or something, but he just drew a bell curve of efficiency of spend. And it was one of those things that, again, a bit like what we were saying about private equity, where it's like head-smackingly obvious, but it was like, you get to a point where you should spend more because it's making you a strong profit margin and you're growing and there's scale behind that. But then you reach the top of that bell curve and it starts to go down in terms of profitability. And then you're just buying the market, but you're buying it at a higher rate per conversion, if you like, in terms of what that looks like. And again, like we were saying on the whole, kind of merchandising side, there's a business decision to be made. Are you going for a land grab if you want as much as possible? And again, there's a business case and an argument that you should be doing that. Or are you going for profitability up into a certain point and then leaving everything else on the table because that doesn't work for you? And how does that sit alongside SEO and your other channels in terms of optimizing that spend?
And actually, something you said there reminded me, to be fair to the paid search side, or specifically to be fair to the Google side, I heard from a very smart PPC leader who deals with the paid search equivalents of a lot of the questions that we're dealing with these large e-commerce retailers, who said, that cost per click inflation absolutely is a thing. What the the way he sees that in the round, or what justifies that over the long run, is he says that what they have to do at their scale is hold Google accountable to delivering more value per click. It's saying, okay, for Google needs to charge more and more and more per click, but those clicks have to become more and more and more valuable in order for the business model to stack up end to end for the customer as well as for Google.
Right.
And whether that is more compelling ads, whether it's better targeting, whether it's better tools to measure and understand and attribute value, that's how he would see it. And obviously he's kind of coming purely from the paid side of things, but I thought it was interesting just to reflect that into the conversation of that he says he wants to hold Google accountable to more like a kind of cost per acquisition or a ROAS number. And then they do have those interesting conversations with senior Google folks about, well, look, here's the number we care about, here's the number you care about, and these linkages have to join up. And if this number's going up, we've got to figure out how those cogs continue to fit together.
Exactly, yeah, that makes sense. And I guess the inflation, there should be an inflation on cost per click.
And I think there probably has. This has worked. When we think about, this is why Google is such a successful public company, and they hit their earnings year in, year out. But obviously, the other side of that is on the paid side, you're a customer of Google, not necessarily that you get to. I think you have to be really quite big before you get very good treatment, but you do at least have that access. On the pure SEO side, there's a few reps who will answer Twitter messages or whatever it might be on the SEO side. I feel like e-commerce is kind of interestingly straddling some of these areas. We've talked about this with we've already mentioned Merchant Center and the shopping feed, but that's an area where it's in the middle, isn't it? And
it is.
Yeah, it currently servicing both, and going to be interesting to see how that plays out.
It'd be interesting to see how that plays out for sure. I think most of our clients, we're helping to manage the SEO side, if you like, from a merchant feed perspective. I think there's probably also a case of AI at the moment is only SEO, if you like, on that side, but how long that will be for, who knows? But again, I think it's stuff that I think SEO is actually quite well placed in certain areas, as much as there's risk that what you've done previously might not be as effective or as important moving forward. I think the way that things are shifting, there's also stuff that kind of we have the right, almost like skills, if you like, in terms of taking that forward as well. So I think it's an interesting time, but definitely. There's certainly a lot of areas that, in terms of the way things are shifting, that would have benefit from kind of the way that we've approached things from an SEO mindset previously.
Yeah, definitely. Anytime you're doing that kind of, I guess back in the day we'd have called it paid inclusion, right? The kind of,
of course.
You don't write the advert, you're just giving Google some money for your thing to be a bit more visible than it would have been otherwise.
Yeah.
Which is essentially how shopping feed, paid side of shopping feed works. Then Google needs to layer in the quality element of that in a way that isn't just evaluating click-through rate of adverts. Thinking of PPC from 2005, and as you say, a lot of those skills, it ends up looking more like SEO, doesn't it? So
I think that's right.
Interesting. I hope that it gets the support it needs. We've talked. There's some areas of unclarity around this, I think, right now, in terms of whether it's possible, desirable, against terms of service, to separate out your merchant feed into a organic and paid feed separately. You and I have both been asking the experts, haven't we? I
know it feels like you weren't supposed to do that, and I feel like maybe there's a backtracking on how that's going. But like you say, there's not the
official line is not clear.
Exactly.
So, for the benefit of the audience, that there's things in different directions. So on the one hand, it's become possible. There is now a checkbox that says this feed is for paid or this feed is for organic. There's various other, I can't remember what the other, there's like 4 checkboxes in that list. I can't remember what they all are. But basically you can have a feed for one or a feed for the other. And it's not clear whether that's supposed to be that you put, all of your products in one, a set of products that you want paid and organic in one feed, and then ones that you don't want to advertise, you want only organic, but different products, or whether you're allowed to do all your products in both and target one bit and target the other bit. The official documentation is unclear on this. The support forums are full of people saying it's against the guidelines or the rules to have a single product in multiple feed targeting the same country. But that may be a legacy of before this kind of checkbox filter was available. So we're trying to dig into this right now.
I'd be really interested to see how that works behind the scenes. Are there different departments at Google that deal with each of those? And I don't know, but
I don't know either. It's quite an opaque bit of Google, I think. When you speak to the organic search folks, they think everything to do with shopping, even organic shopping, is not exactly search. And I don't know whether the same is kind of true on the paid side. If they're like, but this isn't AdWords either. This is some whole other thing. But anyway, as we come into the final few minutes, I wanted to end with something that I know you're really passionate about, which is what we call the talent pipeline. So, we've been talking here a lot about our clients and customers and their businesses, but bring it all the way back around to where we started in terms of our businesses. Everything is about people, and I think both of us have been fortunate enough over our years to have worked with some really, really exceptional people. And the industry is great because that exceptional talent comes from all kinds of places. I think probably because SEO still isn't something that kids are at school going, you know what I want to be when I grow up is an SEO consultant. But what's your latest thinking on this? How are you thinking about this in the context of your business?
It is interesting actually, because I started an agency in Oxford. Obviously your background is Cambridge, and I found from a Oxford perspective, we used to hire people from Oxford University to do Google Ads. They were great. We had like maths and physics backgrounds, and they're honestly absolutely brilliant. From an SEO perspective, we struggled to hire people from Oxford University for SEO. You kind of actually, the people that worked out better in that case were quite often people who maybe they went to college, but it's kind of more, they just get stuck in, they experiment, they try they have their own sites. Those kind of were more characteristics of people who felt like they would try new things, roll their sleeves up, and kind of, not saying people wouldn't do that, they're very smart in terms of Oxford University, but they're two different types of people, and that certainly worked well for us back in the day, looking at how you can combine those two together in terms of maybe the more logical versus creative way of thinking, if you like. And now I think moving forward, I mean, there's now, I'm sure you can study SEO. I'm sure certainly digital marketing. There's much more of a background that you have, but I think it's still trying to get to that background of you still need to be a lifelong learner. This isn't kind of
curiosity.
I've got my skills, I'm going to do this for the next 5 years, because next year you're out of date, if not next week. So I think it's trying to look for talent that, again, experience and track record always helps. If there's people that have done similar problems for you, certainly when you're talking about enterprise clients, you don't want this to be necessarily their first job. Equally, it's nice to have people that you can bring through over time as well. So I think it's just having that talent attraction model really helps. I think this is where some of the things on the marketing side blends into having two pipelines. You've got your sales and marketing client acquisition pipeline, but equally talent acquisition. I think since we probably relaunched in 2012, I think we probably used recruiters 2, maybe 3 times. Everything else has just come through. Sometimes it's our own outreach, but quite often it's the brand. People know of us.
Essentially the marketing pipeline.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing. It's then you've got people who know us, want to work with us. And I'm not saying we get every decision right, but we've learnt the trends of, okay, how do we define who we are? What's our vision of where we're going in the future? What are the values that we have? And how do we make sure that when we recruit, it's against all of those things to make sure that we feel like this is the best fit for our team and our clients.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I think it's kind of diversity at its most core level, in the fact that we kind of seen a lot of the same things you described. Like there's value to the academic thinker,
Yeah.
as long as they can roll up their sleeves enough, there's value to the the somebody who's built it up through experience, or is just prepared to learn and is hungry and energetic and going to put the time in. And I mean, as someone who, as you say, comes from the kind of more academic side of things, I've been a strong advocate that people not only do they not need a digital marketing degree, they don't need a degree at all to work in our industry.
Yeah.
And I've definitely had little social media arguments with people about that. And yeah, interestingly, thinking back over the years, some of the more academic folks who we've seen who've come into SEO and done really well have sometimes not been, like you say, the maths and physics side of things.
Right.
Saying as somebody who comes from the maths side, it's been more like the PPE or the the philosophy or whatever is some of the sometimes work better. But then the experience one is really interesting, because I think we have found in the SearchPilot realm, we've hired more experienced folks into some roles than we ever did in our distilled days. So in engineering, for example, we've had a couple of great hires who've had serious experience in their area of focus, and the value they've been able to add by coming in and just hitting the ground running and genuinely knowing how to solve those problems has been so valuable. But they almost get their feet held to the fire by the kind of enthusiastic earlier career, hungry, curious, interested mind. Yeah. And then you mentioned the enterprise thing, and I think that's one of the things that I've noticed most as we've gone more and more enterprise is the gap in the skills between essentially account management and the more technical skills of whatever the thing you're doing is. In our case, typically test building, the different values of experience in different areas. And I don't know, I don't have answers to all this stuff. We've found that we still have the best talent pipeline in SEO. Obviously, like, it's easiest for us to hire SEO analysts, especially, who we can train up into SEO consultants through SEO testing consultants. That's all they do in our world. We still have a slightly bit more of an open question of how do we build that same employer brand in the other areas we need, especially in the engineering and product side.
I think that's I think that's right. And similar to us, I think the skill, and this is where experience helps, is the commercial thinking. It's that side of, okay, well, why is a client paying us money? What do we need to deliver in return? Again, it sounds quite obvious in a lot of respects, but quite often that can get lost. So it's very much just bringing it back into kind of almost that account management layer of how do you understand the client? How do you make sure that we're talking their language, hitting their targets, hitting their objectives? And that side of things can take a bit more time in terms of kind of just years on the job, essentially, of understanding what that looks like.
Which kind of brings us full circle to where we started, because I think that's easiest with an ICP, isn't it? Because then
it is.
You can explain all of your clients or customers' businesses better. Your business model is easier to explain in terms of how it fits in to servicing that kind of customer, and hopefully get better at explaining it as well. That's probably a good place to wrap up and bring to a close. If folks want to see more of your stuff, where's the best place to follow you and Resignal these days?
I feel like these days I'm only active on LinkedIn, to be honest. So feel free to connect with me there. I've kind of ignored the wave of blue sky and everything else, and kind of less and less active on Twitter. So LinkedIn's
LinkedIn's the place. Good. Okay. Well, really fun catching up, Kevin. Great to see you. And folks should also join us in person at the Recommerce event.
Yeah, absolutely. That's in
follow
May,
each of us on social media, and you'll hear more about our collaboration on that as we get close to the date.
Yeah, of course. Great talking to you too, Will. Thank you.
See ya. Bye.